I want you to picture a scenario that is probably going to trigger a little bit of PTSD for anyone working in the nonprofit sector. You're sitting at your desk, you believe in your mission, you know your organization changes lives, but then you have to write the document that actually asks for the money.
The blinking cursor on the blank white screen.
Exactly, the universal nightmare. And you just start spiraling. You think, what is this even supposed to be?
Is it a brochure? Is it a grant proposal?
Do I start with a sob story? Do I start with our 1954 founding date? Do I just, paste in the mission statement that nobody actually understands?
It's that paralysis of having too much information and just nowhere to put it.
And usually the default panic move is to just explain how broke the organization is. We need money to keep the lights on. But today, we're going to completely dismantle that approach. We're diving into a concept called the case for support.
Which, I'll be honest, that sounds like the driest, most administrative thing we could possibly talk about.
It does. It sounds like legal discovery or something.
A case for support.
Yeah. But as we went through the lecture notes from Matthew Hug on this, specifically looking at the architecture of fundraising communications, I realized the case isn't just paperwork. It's the source code. It is the DNA for every single dollar an organization raises. If you get this document right, everything else, the brochures, the speeches, the website, it just flows out of it.
And if you get it wrong, or if you skip it entirely, you're just constantly reinventing the wheel every time you ask for a donation. You're making up a new story every Tuesday.
So we're going to cover the whole anatomy of this beast today. We'll look at why your English teacher was probably wrong about grammar, why you should stop talking about your organization's history, and how to shift your mindset from begging to solving.
It's really a masterclass in persuasion when you break it down.
It is. And before we get into the nitty-gritty of active verbs and all that, I want to mention that if you're listening to this and thinking, okay, I need to actually build one of these, not just listen to a deep dive about it, you really need to head over to fundraisingcourses.com.
Yeah, that's the place to go if you want to move from the theory to the actual practice.
We're going to give you the high-level analysis here, but fundraisingcourses.com is where you go to actually sharpen the tools. So keep that in mind. Okay, let's start with the definition, because the source material makes this distinction that I think trips up like 90% of organizations.
The distinction between the internal case and the external case.
Right. And most people try to mash these into one single document, which is a total disaster. Let's talk about the internal case first. Hug calls this fodder.
Which is such a great word for it. It's livestock feed. It's raw fuel.
Right.
The internal case is not pretty. It is not designed to be handed to a wealthy donor at a gala. The notes describe it as report-like. Think, 8.5 by 11 paper, maybe stapled in the corner.
Spiral bound if you're feeling fancy.
Exactly. It's the encyclopedia. It's the source of truth for your organization.
So it's the repository of every single argument, every statistic, every program detail.
Everything, every financial need your organization has, it covers everything you actively pursue.
That phrase is important, actively pursue. So this isn't some wish list for 10 years from now.
No, it's what you're doing today. And the audience for this document is strictly insiders. We're talking staff, trustees, the board of directors.
Right.
Maybe, and this is a big maybe, a donor who is so embedded in the organization, they're basically staff. But you do not use this for solicitation.
Because it's too dense.
Yes.
It's the warehouse.
That is the perfect analogy. The internal case is the warehouse where you store all your inventory. You don't take a customer donor into a dusty warehouse and say, hey, look at all these boxes.
You take them to the showroom.
You take them to the showroom. And the showroom is the external case.
So that's the glossy brochure.
Yes. The external case is what most people think of. It's designed, it has photos, it has emotional pull. But the key difference isn't just the glossy paper. It's the selection.
You're curating.
You are absolutely curating. You walk into the warehouse, the internal case, and you say, okay, this specific donor cares about our literacy program. So you grab the literacy boxes, you polish them up, and you put those in the external case.
And you leave the facility maintenance budget back in the warehouse.
Way in the back of the warehouse, yeah.
So the internal case is really the shield against writer's block.
Yeah.
If you have that fodder ready, you never have to stare at a blank page again. You just go to the file, pull the relevant facts, and polish them up.
Precisely. It's an efficiency tool, but it's also a consensus tool. If you have the internal case written down and agreed upon, you stop having those arguments in the hallway about what the organization's actual priorities are.
It's in the book.
It's in the book.
Now, this brings us to a really contentious point in the source material. the authorship.
Mhm.
Because if I'm an executive director, I'm busy. I'm running a company. My first instinct is to say, this sounds like a lot of writing. I'm going to hire a freelancer.
Or just tell the development director to go lock themselves in a room and write it.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And the source material says that is a fatal error.
A fatal error. It calls for a very specific collaboration. It says the case must be written by the development officer and the executive director together.
And I can just hear the groans of executive directors everywhere. I don't have time for this.
Of course. But here is why it's non-negotiable. You have to avoid what the source calls the bubble.
The bubble of assumptions.
Right. We all live in our own bubbles. The executive director lives in a bubble of strategy, vision, and, let's be honest, a lot of jargon. They know the how so well, they sometimes forget the why.
And what about the development officer?
Well, they live in the bubble of the market. They know what donors want to hear, but they might not have that deep operational nuance. So if you let just one of them write it, the document is lopsided.
So if the ED writes it, it reads like a technical manual.
And if the fundraiser writes it, it might sound like fluff with no real substance.
So the process is more like a volley. One person drafts, the other one edits, back and forth.
And it's in that friction, that, argument over how do we explain this program, that you actually clarify the mission for yourselves. If you can't explain it clearly to each other, you definitely can't explain it to a donor.
The notes do say you can hire an outside writer. But there's a huge caveat.
A massive warning label on that one.
Yeah.
You can hire an outsider, but only for the polish.
So they can fix the grammar, make the sentences sing.
Exactly. They can rearrange the flow, but they cannot do the foundational thinking.
Because they don't own the mission.
You can't outsource your heart. If you hire a consultant to write your why, you end up with a document that just sounds generic. It sounds like every other nonprofit. The passion has to come from the people actually doing the work.
Okay, so we've got our team. The ED and the development officer are locked in a room. They're ready to write. Now we need to look at the structure. What actually goes in this thing? The source references a framework by Gerald Panis from his book, Making the Case. He breaks it down into 8 essential elements.
And we shouldn't think of these as like a checklist where you have chapter 1, chapter 2. Think of them more as ingredients in a recipe. You can mix them in different ways, but if you leave one out, the cake doesn't rise.
Right. Okay, so the first 2 seem pretty standard. You have the title and the hook.
Yep. The title sets the theme. It's not the 2024 annual fund. It's something like the campaign to end hunger in our city.
And the hook, which Panis calls grabbing the reader, has to happen instantly.
Instantly. No warming up. You need a quote, a startling statistic, something that stops the skim and forces them to actually read.
Then we get into the meat of the argument, the irrefutable case. This is the need.
And it has to be irrefutable. It can't be, it would be nice if we did this. It has to be, this is a crisis.
Linked to that is the unique position. This is the why us factor.
This is where so many pitches fail. You might convince me that homelessness is a problem, but you haven't convinced me that your organization is the specific tool to fix it.
You have to prove you're the best one for the job.
You have to prove you have the expertise or the location or the method that no one else has.
Now, I want to pause on the next element because this is where the source material just throws a curveball. The element is called waving the flag. It's the history, the heritage, the founded in 1954.
The origin story.
Right. And almost every single nonprofit puts this on page 1. We were founded 50 years ago by Mrs. Haverford. But the source says, do not put this at the start. In fact, hide it in the middle somewhere.
It feels totally counterintuitive, doesn't it? We're taught that introductions start with, this is who I am.
Yeah.
But in fundraising, the donor isn't buying your past. They are buying the future solution.
So Mrs. Haverford needs to wait her turn.
Mrs. Haverford needs to wait. If you start with history, you are looking backward. A donor wants to look forward. The only reason to even include history is to prove you have the track record to pull off the job. It's just credentials.
So it's basically saying, we've been here 50 years, so we won't run off with your money.
That's it. It's not the lead story.
That is a crucial shift. Stop selling the past. Okay, moving through the list, we have reinforcing urgency. Why now?
Right. If the donor thinks, I can give to this next year, you've already lost.
And making it happen, this is the price tag.
And you have to be specific. We need support is weak. We need $150,000 to buy this van is strong.
And finally, the 8th element, the benediction.
It sounds a bit religious, but it's really just rhetorical. It's the closing blessing. You don't end on a budget number. You end by restating the vision, the hope. the promised land that the donor is helping to reach.
So those are the ingredients. But you can have all the right ingredients and still cook a terrible meal if your technique is off. This brings us to the art of persuasion, the tone and the style. There's a phrase in the lecture notes that really stopped me. It describes the case for support as strong but disposable.
I love that phrase. It's such a
It
paradox.
feels wasteful. We just talked about how much work goes into this. The ED and the development officer sweating over every word, and now you're telling me it's disposable?
It's an ego check. The writing has to be perfect, no typos, clear logic, beautiful phrasing, but you have to accept that this is a utility document. It is not literature.
Right.
It's not going to be archived in the Library of Congress. It is going to be read, acted upon, and then thrown in the recycling bin.
So don't be precious about it.
Not at all. It's a tool. A hammer doesn't need to be admired. It needs to drive the nail. Once the nail is in, once the donation is made, the hammer can go back in the drawer. The value is in the result, not the paper itself.
And to make sure that hammer actually drives the nail, the source is, well, it's militant about one specific grammar rule. No passive voice.
The enemy of all good writing, but it is especially the enemy of fundraising.
The notes give these great examples. Let's look at them. Passive voices. The novel was read by Mom in one day.
Versus the active voice. Mom read the novel in one day.
Passive. The entire stretch of highway was paved by the crew.
Active. The crew paved the highway.
It seems like a small stylistic choice, but why does this matter so much for a donor?
Because passive voice hides the actor. It creates distance. Think about it. Hungry children are fed by our program. Okay, that's a fact.
Right.
But it's boring.
Wait, passive.
We feed hungry children. That's better. But the ultimate active voice in fundraising is, you will feed hungry children.
That puts the donor in the driver's seat.
Exactly. Active voice creates agency. You want the donor to feel like an agent of change, not just an observer of a process.
Speaking of agency, let's talk about the difference between urgency and shrillness. Because a lot of organizations try to create urgency, but they just end up sounding desperate.
This is the classic fiscal year-end trap. You see this in emails all the time. Please give because our books close on Tuesday.
And let's be honest, nobody cares about your accounting cycle.
Nobody. That is an administrative problem, not a humanitarian crisis. That is shrill. It's whining.
Or we need money because the city cut our permit.
Right. That's dirty laundry. Donors don't fund your problems. They fund your solutions. The source makes a brilliant distinction here. True urgency comes from the consequences of inaction for the beneficiary.
Okay, give me an example of that.
So shrill is, we need $5,000 or we can't make payroll. That just makes me worry you're mismanaged.
Right.
True urgency is, if we don't raise $5,000 this week, the shelter will have to close on Saturday night and 50 people will sleep in the snow.
Wow. Okay. One is about you and your bank account. The other is about the human cost.
Exactly. The urgency must always be reframed around the mission, never the organization.
And this leads us perfectly into the final and I think most profound philosophical shift in the source material. The move from the tin cup to the solution.
This is the mindset shift that changes everything. The tin cup mentality is the beggar. Please, sir, can I have some more? It assumes the organization is the one with the need. We need cash.
But the case for support just flips that on its head.
Completely. Hug outlines a triad here. The three players in this game. You have the mission recipient, the person in trouble. You have the donor, the person who wants to help. And then you have the organization.
And where does the organization fit into that?
We are just the pipe. We are the conduit.
That's a humbling way to put it. You're just the plumbing.
It's vital plumbing. But yes, the recipient has a problem. The donor has a need to solve a problem. And that's important. Donors need to give to feel significance. The organization is simply the tool that connects the donor's desire to the recipient's need.
So when you write the case, you aren't asking for money for you. You are offering the donor a way to solve a problem that they care about.
Exactly. You're offering them a solution. You are saying, you hate seeing people hungry. I have a machine that fixes that. Do you want to use it? That is a position of strength, not begging.
And to make them want to use that machine, you have to establish what the source calls emotional proximity.
This is the final hook. You have to show the donor that this problem is closer than they think. Maybe it's geographic. It's happening in their zip code. Maybe it's social.
The notes suggest asking the question, could this, but for the grace of God, be their problem someday?
That is the empathy bridge. If you're writing for a medical research charity, you remind the donor that this disease doesn't care how rich you are. It's about creating solidarity. This isn't a problem for those people. It's a problem for us.
Facts are forgettable. Feelings fund missions.
That is the bumper sticker right there.
So we've taken the listener from the blank page panic to a fully structured argument. We've moved from the internal case fodder to the external case polish. We've killed the passive voice and buried the tin cup.
We've done some serious demolition and reconstruction today.
We have, and I want to go back to that idea of disposability one last time, because I think it's actually really liberating.
It is.
You can write this beautiful document, and yes, it might end up in the trash. But the work you did to create it, the alignment between the director and the fundraiser, the clarifying of the mission, the sharpening of the argument, that stays.
The paper is disposable, the clarity is permanent, and the feeling you leave with the donor, that lasts.
If you are feeling like your organization needs that kind of clarity, or if you just realized your current case is actually just a brochure full of passive voice and history lessons, I'm going to nudge you one last time. Go to fundraisingcourses.com.
Seriously. We covered the what and the why today. They teach the how.
Fundraisingcourses.com. Go check it out. Because like we said, you are the conduit, you're the pipe, and we need the plumbing to work because there are a lot of people waiting on the other end for help.
Well said.
Thanks for diving in with us. Now go write the case.
See you next time.